I would like to acknowledge that we are streaming today's event on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, both in the room and online. Now, the format for today, as discussed earlier, is a rapid-fire series of presentations to start off with. We'll hear from the Minister, and then we'll have a number of other short presentations before we move into a panel session. It's going to be a jammed-packed program, so strap in. We are in for quite the ride. Now, questions and interaction today will be via the Pigeonhole app. For those of you in the room, the QR code is on your table. Please make sure that you download that because we will not be asking any questions from the floor with a microphone. They'll all be going through the Pigeonhole app, and that gives our online participants an equal opportunity to participate. Now, it's my pleasure today to introduce a couple of people. The first one is today's facilitator, Varya Davidson, Energy Transition Leader at PwC Australia, and she'll be facilitating and moderating the questions later. It's going to be quite a daunting task, as we were talking about before. But it's now my pleasure to welcome Liz McNamara, Group Executive Sustainability and Corporate Affairs of APA Group, and I invite her to the stage to formally introduce the speakers for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's a pleasure to represent APA here today and to introduce our guest speakers, the Federal Minister for Climate Change and Energy, the Honourable Chris Bowen, who will address us shortly, as Megan just said, followed by the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of AEMO, Daniel Westerman, and the CEO of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, Ian Learmonth. Thank you all for making the time to be here with us today. And thank you, of course, and congratulations to CEDA for once again bringing together an impressive group of speakers. I know I can speak on behalf of all of us in the room and the many people online, I believe, when I say we're all keen to hear from each of you in terms of your thoughts and priorities relating to the government's Rewiring the Nation program, and also hear about the significant progress that each of you are leading to drive Australia's decarbonisation agenda and the energy transition forward. This coming Sunday marks a year since the last federal election, a fact I'm sure the Minister is keenly aware of. In that time, we've continued to experience what many of us continue to call unprecedented change across the energy market. As a system that was once based on the predictable 24-hour, 7 days a week operation of a relatively small number of very large generators, accelerates its way to a very different but a very necessary future. The job in front of all of us, government, industry and the community is, as we all continue to tell each other, enormous. And I'm sure most of us in the room don't envy the job that you, in particular, Minister, have had as you and your state colleagues have tried to navigate this challenge. For APA, we've been refining our company strategy and it's now firmly focused on the Australian energy transition and the opportunity that we see in delivering this. We see our role as a dual-track role: decarbonise our own business, but at the same time partner with our customers to deliver the energy infrastructure solutions that they will need so that they're able to achieve their climate ambitions and decarbonise the economy. Through APA's continued development of renewables and electricity transmission, along with the critical role we know gas and gas firming is going to play in backing in and backing up those renewables, APA's role in achieving Australia's 2030 reduction target is significant. And at the same time, we're getting ready for what comes beyond this as we progress research and pilots in relation to future fuels such as hydrogen, so that we're ready to support our customers as their demand for those fuels inevitably ramps up. But enough from me, you've come to hear from our guest speakers. So let me introduce the first of them, the Federal Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen. Having served as the member for Prospect for 18 years and 6 years in the Rudd-Gillard ministries, Minister Bowen was appointed to the Albanese ministry in June last year and has lost no time in implementing the government's climate and energy agenda. A legislated 2030 emissions reduction target, the National Energy Transformation Partnership, a capacity investment scheme, the safeguard mechanism reform, an EV strategy, as of last week, a hydrogen head start program, and of course, what we've come to hear about today, Australia's Rewiring the Nation program. None of these were in place a year ago, and these just scratch the surface of what's been delivered in the year so far. Minister, you have been very busy, and we're all very grateful that you've made the time to come and talk to us today. Please join me in welcoming Minister Bowen to the stage.
Thank you, Liz. 235 years ago, 11 ships sailed through the heads of the harbour just beyond this hotel and changed the lives of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, forever, and changed the lives of all First Peoples forever. So acknowledging the elders of the Gadigal people is a small act of recognition that we all do today. Later this year, our country will have the opportunity for a much larger act of recognition. Some people say this is a radical change. But what can be radical about recognising our First Peoples in our most important governing document and providing a voice for them on matters which impact on them? New Zealand reached a constitutional settlement with their First Peoples in 1840. They enshrined Maori representation in their parliament in 1867. Canada recognised their First Peoples in their constitution in 1982. 35 years ago, next month, the Barunga Statement was handed to then Prime Minister Bob Hawke. 6 years ago next week, our country received the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Surely 2023 is Australia's time. Thank you to CEDA and the Governance Institute and all of you who are advocating for recognition later this year. This is an important moment for our country, one I believe we will take. I'm a little braver than Megan, so I am going to acknowledge some people here today. 3 members of our Energy and Climate official family, Ian Learmonth, the Chief Executive of CFC, Daniel Westerman, the Chief Executive of AEMO, and Andrew Dyer, the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, 3 very important members of our Energy and Climate official family, all of whom play a key role in delivering Rewiring the Nation in a different way, and I know we're going to hear from Ian and Daniel in a few moments, but it's good of them to join us today. I also want to acknowledge Meryl Swanson, the member for Paterson, a great and important member of our caucus and a powerful voice for a very energy important region in our country. Well, congratulations to CEDA for convening this important conference on the Rewiring the Nation program. CEDA has a long heritage, as you know, of involvement in the key economic decisions before our country. And there's no conversation, not one, more important to our economic future in Australia today than the energy transition well and truly underway, not one. Making this energy transformation as smooth and as efficient as possible and maximising our potential to be a renewable energy powerhouse is the absolute key to our economic prosperity in coming generations. Australia has more to lose from unchecked climate change than any other developed country in the world, and we have more to gain from our renewable potential than any other. That's why I regard this job that I currently do as by far the most important I have ever done. And Rewiring the Nation is one of the most important elements of our program. It's an economic plan, it's a plan for our regions, it's a plan for decarbonisation, it's a plan for emissions reduction. There's no transition without transmission. I was at a G20 meeting a few months ago and the British minister said, Chris Bowen invented the phrase, there's no transition without transmission. I said, no, I used it a lot, I didn't invent it, which is good because then somebody else said, yeah, I invented it. So glad I didn't overclaim. Not sure if he was telling the truth or not, but I hadn't claimed it. But I do use it a lot because it is true. Now, of course, there are detractors and naysayers who say this is gold plating or unnecessary. This is, of course, just plain wrong. Rewiring the nation is simply about upgrading our energy grid to make it fit for purpose for a modern grid for a renewable economy. It doesn't make sense to invest in and build renewable energy unless we can get it to where it will be consumed. I see it as pretty simply as similar to the need to upgrade our road network. We don't drive on the same roads we drove on 50 years ago. They've been built and upgraded and added to and improved. We haven't done the same for our energy infrastructure, so now we have a lot of catching up to do. And of course, as Liz said, our new and modern energy system needs a very different transmission system. It needs a massive upgrade to make it fit for purpose, so that's what we're doing. Now, Liz mentioned some of the things we've done in our first year, and we've made good progress. In our first year, we've struck funding agreements with New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. No funding agreement with any state is ever entirely smooth in its negotiation. There were many late night and early morning calls between me and my state counterparts, many last-minute little hurdles that had to be overcome. States always, regardless of their political persuasion, always hold their corner hard in financial negotiations, and these were no different. But there was goodwill and good faith in all of those discussions, and that's seen these deals come to fruition. We prioritised Tasmania for negotiations, primarily, of course, because of the importance of the Marinus Link, which will see Tasmania move from being currently 100% renewable to being 200% renewable. The focus has been on procurement of the long-term lead items, and that work's well underway for Marinus. The project's progressing through its environmental and planning approvals, and I'm very pleased about that. In Victoria, no project's been more important than VNI West, and I'm advised that consultation on route options has been concluded, and AEMO is expected to soon release the project assessment conclusions, the final stage of the RIT process, identifying a recommended route. And this, of course, is a major step towards enabling the CEFC to consider finance for the VNI West project in more detail. The New South Wales project, the New South Wales deal, was full of agreements on different projects, none more important than HumeLink. And of course, through Rewiring the Nation, the Commonwealth's underwriting the early procurement of the long lead items such as transformers. This is enabling the company to do a bulk procurement order, addressing the supply chain risks and driving down the costs for consumers and helping the project be delivered on time. And right now our focus is on procuring those long lead items. The regulatory approvals for the final elements of HumeLink are expected this year. I just highlight those three projects because announcing a deal is important, but then what happens after that is so much more important even than the original deal, which is necessary to facilitate it. And there's three big projects. I just picked three, give you an indication of the fact that simply announcing a deal doesn't build the lines. There's a whole lot of work to occur after that, and that work has been occurring at a very intense pace. And that's the progress on the first three jurisdictions, and obviously I can't go into details, but I can tell you I'm very pleased with the progress of negotiations with other jurisdictions, and I'm looking forward to making more announcements in coming months. Now, this is a big task. The opportunities are enormous, especially for job-creating, investment-attracting, nation-building projects in the regions. But equally, we have to acknowledge the challenges are very real. Supply chain constraints are real across the board, in all projects, in all parts of the economy. But in relation to transmission, we're of course not the only country in the world doing this. So supply chains are particularly tight. We're competing with products in an environment of very tight construction schedules as well. The timing of our announced deals with New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania has been important to allow orders to be placed, as I mentioned, for key equipment in a tight supply chain. And of course, managing the labour market's an important challenge as well. It's a good challenge to have, as many jobs will be created when our construction is fully up and running, but we have to acknowledge that's an issue to be managed. But I wanted to be frank with you today and say that in my view, as important as these challenges are, none of them come close to social licence as the most important issue that we have to tackle. A nearly complete rebuild of our grid comes with challenges, particularly for the communities in the projects in which will be built. Now, it would be easy, but wrong, to dismiss these concerns just as NIMBYism. In my experience, and I've met with many groups across Australia, met with communities impacted. In my experience, most concerned community members are not anti-renewables, not anti-transmission, and not anti-progress. Nor in most cases are they opposed to the projects going ahead if their concerns are adequately addressed and they have a proper say. They see the need to get renewables into the grid. They also see the local, economic, social, environmental impacts of these projects. Now, before the election, I said that the regulatory investment test for transmission, the RIT-T process, known to all of you, was seriously flawed and badly in need of improvement. The RIT-T regulatory process was designed for small grid augmentations, not for the massive rebuild that we're currently undertaking. And I'm pleased again with the progress that we've made in the RIT-T reform system. While reforming a complex regulatory regime is in itself a complex task, our approach really comes down to four fundamental key points. Firstly, broadening the benefits of transmission development. Until now, the economic pros and cons were the key driver of the RIT-T process, not the social benefits or the risks. The cost-benefit analysis, which does not take into account appropriately take into account views of communities, is not, in my view, fit for purpose. Last month, therefore, I submitted rule changes to the Australian Energy Market Commission to commence the reform process with a fast-track process set to see these changes taken effect from November this year. The rule change seeks to improve community outcomes and ensure the timely and efficient delivery of major transmission projects. We're making an important change to ensure benefits of the lower rate of RTN finance are fairly shared between both consumers and project developers, so that developers don't just pocket the lower rate while passing the status quo on to consumers. This concessional finance rule that I proposed is required to pass on the benefits of Rewiring the Nation concessional finance to consumers. Without this rule change, all the benefits of concessional finance would flow as far as TNSPs alone. So these changes are together making sure that the social dividends, which are a key part of the equation, are factored into the regulatory review process and fairly shared, not just a straight cost-benefit analysis based on a limited set of data. Secondly, earlier consultation is critical. I've been and seen firsthand too many examples where communities were not consulted in the early planning of projects. Communities make a legitimate argument, in my view, that they weren't consulted until the die was cast. The social licence rule change will clarify that transmission network service providers' community consultation expectations for actionable ISP projects and will improve stakeholder engagement with communities affected by these projects. That will be required under the rule change. This is a sensible change which will put communities in the picture earlier and make consultation more genuine and not a tokenistic step in the process. Communities know when they're being taken for granted, and it's not good for them or for the country. Thirdly, we need to improve the local dividends of projects. Now, in New South Wales and Victoria, we've seen a big step up in the compensation for landholders, with both states relatively recently introducing payments of $200,000 a kilometre to landholders hosting major new transmission. This is a good thing. Now, importantly, the fact that these $200,000 payments are made over a long period of time, 20 years in the case of New South Wales and 25 years in Victoria, means that landholders are able to factor in these payments in the future value of land sales and their resale value, and they're able to point out to potential buyers that there is an income stream attached to the transmission, which is not drought dependent, which is paid every year regardless of market circumstances, which will help them with the resale value of their properties when and if they choose to put them on the market. Equally important, though, are meaningful non-financial benefits in partnership with the community. Investments which build longer-term wealth and capacity, not just improve local amenity. Investments like long-standing scholarships rather than just a few new netball courts or shade sails, to be very frank with you. And finally, stronger and better engagement. My department's working with Andrew and the state governments to introduce a framework for community engagement, a best practice quality guide. Once finalised, it will act as an A to Z of community engagement with clear expectations outlined to help TNSPs planning for their projects. This is a simple framework which will make a significant difference. And pleasingly, all of this work is well underway, with significant progress on the framework expected by the end of this year. And of course, stronger and better engagement also includes stronger and better engagement with First Nations communities as well. This is already a priority for our state and territory energy ministers, and the Commonwealth allocated $5.5 million towards a First Nations clean energy strategy to ensure First Nations people have a say in the energy policies and programs in the transition to net zero. And I'm looking forward to updating my state and territory colleagues at our quarterly meeting in Alice Springs later this week. This strategy will be co-designed with First Nations communities and organisations, and an expert advisory committee will will assist in the development of the strategy. Now, each of these 4 points are equally important, and reform of the regulatory regime is vital. But again, I'm going to be frank with you about this. No regulatory regime alone can take the load of improving community outcomes. A lot of our success here as a country will depend on the companies represented in this room. Real and genuine community consultation and engagement by proponents. I'm not here to suggest it's easy, and I'm not here to be critical, because I know how hard it is. But I am here to say, collectively, we need to focus on this. In the communities I've visited, I've seen it done really well by some companies, and I've also seen it done less well. And projects where community consultation is done well are quicker, easier to build, and better for the proponents in the long run. So I have a simple request for everyone involved in the sector, in the rollout of transmission. Please focus on community consultation and do it as well as is possible. Again, we're all on a journey. We all have things to learn. We've all done things we could have done better in the future. But this, I think, is very high on our list, getting it right so that these projects get more community support. These communities, your companies, and our country will all be better off as a result. So thanks again to CEDA for convening this conference. I did prioritise it in the diary because it is so important. This is very much at the core of our agenda, our climate change and energy agenda, which is in turn at the core of our economic agenda. There are very important matters to discuss. And Liz ran through some of the things we've done in our first year. It's true to say I'm pleased, but I'm far from satisfied, because we're just getting started, because the task is so big and there is so much more to do. And I look forward to partnering with all of you, the companies and organisations you represent, on this massive task. We have to be all in. It's not a whole of government effort, it's a whole of society effort, and that means none more than the people in this room. We've got a huge task ahead of us. I look forward to doing it with you. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Let me also acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and let me acknowledge their continuing connection to country. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and of course to all First Nations people here today. To CEDA, thanks very much for hosting this event, and Minister Bowen for your remarks, and in particular the real focus and attention on social licence. So let me begin. As Australia moves rapidly away from its traditional dependency on coal-fired power generation, our energy future will be built on 4 pillars. Renewable energy from the sun, the wind and hydro, firming technology to smooth out the troughs and the peaks, like batteries, pump storage and gas generation, new transmission and modernised distribution networks to connect consumers to those new sources of energy. And lastly, a grid that is capable of running at times entirely on renewable energy. Today I'll focus on the third point, which is to explore a little what Australia will look like in the future based on the choices that we as modern Australian society make around transmission development. Now, transmission wires strung between towers might lack the glamour of smartphones, electric cars and other modern miracles. Some would perhaps argue with that. But they are absolutely fundamental to solving one of Australia's greatest modern day challenges, which is the transition of our energy system to enable a net zero economy. Because achieving net zero by 2050, which is the target of all Australian governments, needs a net zero electricity grid as its first step to get there. And there is already measurable progress. Today, the share of renewable generation in the national electricity market is hitting new highs. For Q1 this year, the average was 37% and peaked at 66% for a half-hour dispatch period. And greenhouse gas emissions for the first quarter from the national electricity market were at their lowest level ever. But things could have gone further still. AEMO's latest market insights report show how new transmission is already needed to increase the flow of renewable generated electrons into the grid. And this need will continue to grow. From our control rooms, we can see that the increasing amounts of solar and wind generation are being curtailed because there's not enough transmission capacity to transport it. Curtailment of renewable generation has grown by almost 40% from a year ago, and the transmission links between our states are maxing out. From January to March this year, the links from Victoria to New South Wales and down to Tasmania were at their limits for 42% and 57% of the time, respectively. And during the hours when the sun was producing free electrons, the links were binding for 2/3 of the time to New South Wales and over 80% of the time to Tasmania. So in other words, parts of our energy highway are gridlocked. And as our coal-fired power stations retire, the lowest cost replacement is firmed renewable energy. And our operational insights confirm the early stages of why investment in several transmission projects are needed to connect these low-cost electrons to Australian homes and businesses. For Q1 this year, growing renewable output meant that wholesale prices in the national electricity market were zero or negative for 12% of the time. To be more specific, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m, when the sun is shining on our solar panels in Victoria and South Australia, wholesale electricity prices were negative in those states for 50 to 60% of the time. So what we need is strategically located and economically justified transmission to carry those low-cost electrons to where they're needed. But how we do this and where we do this is key, because we know that any build of new transmission will cost money, will take time, and undoubtedly cause a level of disruption. Now, AEMO's Integrated System Plan is the 30-year optimal development plan that includes transmission for the national electricity market. And while it has our logo on it, it's actually a work of extensive collaboration, and some would say co-design actually, between AEMO and hundreds of stakeholders. The 2022 plan is based on rigorous economic and engineering analysis over nearly 2 years of in-depth engagement with 1,500 stakeholders, energy consumers, companies, state and federal governments, regulators, analysts, and several folks in this room. The most likely scenario sees a doubling of electricity demand to 2050, which will be met by a huge increase in firmed renewable energy. 9 times today's capacity of grid-scale solar and wind. 5 times the rooftop solar on our homes. 30 times the storage capacity in all of its shapes and sizes, and flexible gas firming too. And to connect these new sources of energy to our homes and businesses, the plan identifies 10,000 kilometres of new transmission that urgently needs to get built. It's a blueprint for $12 billion of investment that returns $28 billion in net market benefits. This new transmission is needed because today's transmission network was laid out 70 years ago to convey the huge amounts of power from the Hunter and Latrobe valleys to the cities. But our cheapest form of energy today, firmed renewable energy, are being built in very different places. They're being built where the sunshine and the wind resources are the strongest. And efficiently building these identified transmission projects will set up our grid to share resources, bolstering reliability and lowering costs for all consumers and taking advantage of a geographic hedge in weather patterns. They'll connect Snowy 2.0 to Sydney and surrounds, and to customers in Victoria via second interconnector. They'll connect the mainland to the vast resources of Tasmanian hydro via second subsea cable. So let's just take a moment to consider what the future will look like when we get these building blocks right. It's a future where wind from the Bass Strait, sunshine from the Mallee, and water flows from the Derwent catchment efficiently power our homes from Port Augusta to Port Douglas. It's a future where the later South Australian sun helps to manage the evening peaks in major load centres like Sydney and Melbourne. It's a future where excess renewable energy is used to pump water uphill in the Snowy Mountains, And then on cloudy and still days when the renewable output is low, that water can then be released and electricity brought back to the power-hungry cities and regions using the same transmission lines. And Australia is not alone in recognising the importance of transmission in reaching net zero. In the UK, energy regulator Ofgem is aiming to accelerate the build of new transmission to connect 50 gigawatts of offshore wind to help deliver their 2030 emissions reduction target. This plan will reduce the reliance on international energy supplies, which are subject to both supply shocks and price shocks, stemming from situations like the war in Ukraine. And we know this here too. In Australia, the Rewiring the Nation program puts major transmission firmly back on the public agenda. But this is something that Australian communities have not encountered for decades. The lack of recent large-scale transmission developments means that unfamiliarity, and that translates to some challenges for everyone involved. Regional and rural communities are being asked to shoulder the benefits, to shoulder the construction and the hosting of new transmission, while the benefits are shared with people hundreds of kilometres away and even interstate. In recent weeks, I've visited regions where large-scale transmission is needed. I've been out to Western Victoria, where farmers are concerned about the impact of new transmission on their lives, on livelihoods, and their concerns are genuinely held. What we must do is put in place the processes and resources to hear and understand communities' concerns and come up with a better way to work together and to benefit together. Because it's upon us all in the energy sector to build the relationships and the social licence that enables the infrastructure, that enables the energy transition to serve all Australians. Because in this energy transition, people matter most. And we all have a shared objective of a safe, reliable and affordable energy system. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Firstly, can I thank CEDA for convening such a well-attended and important event, clearly demonstrating the deep and broad interest that we all have in the energy transition. It's great to be joined by our responsible Minister, Chris Bowen, whose government have been so supportive of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation over the last 12 months. And I should also acknowledge my chair, Stephen Scala, and many board members of the CEFC here this afternoon, as well as staff from my organisation, many of whom, of course, are involved and dedicated to the work of rewiring the nation. I also would pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and great to be here on Gadigal land. The CEFC has been at the forefront of Australia's clean energy transition for more than 10 years now. With only 7 summers until 2030, our work is more urgent than ever if we are to reach our ambitious carbon abatement goal of reducing emissions by 43% by 2030 and successfully transforming our electricity system to one that's going to operate with more than 80% renewables. As Daniel mentioned, in first quarter of 23, renewable energy generation share of output increased 4% from its equivalent quarter of last year, now contributing 37% of the NEM's total. So not bad, but a long way to go. Last year, the CEFC marked 2 important milestones: 10 years of operation and more than $11 billion of commitments to the clean energy transition. And with our leverage driving total transaction value of some $42.8 billion. Every dollar we put out the door has been matched by $2.62 of private sector investment. We've completed more than 285 large-scale transactions, as well as 39,000 smaller-scale deals using intermediaries such as banks. The CFC investments are delivering large-scale solar, battery and wind projects to generate and store the clean energy Australia needs to decarbonise the grid. In addition, our investments outside of renewables are also reducing emissions in sectors from property to transport, in agriculture, infrastructure and manufacturing. We have backed 26 of Australia's most entrepreneurial companies whose clean tech innovations are offering tomorrow's solutions for today's problems. Since inception, we've invested in more than 5 gigawatts of wind and solar, from Collector Wind Farm in New South Wales that recently opened, Bluegrass Solar Farm in Queensland, Golden Plains. I was there at the opening of Golden Plains only the other week, an extraordinary wind farm there near Geelong. And our most recent solar investment, 300 megawatt Walla Walla Solar Farm near Albury-Wodonga. CFC Finance has also helped to develop large-scale storage capacity, including the Victorian Big Battery, the Hornsdale Power Reserve in South Australia, and the Capital Battery in the ACT. And whilst we've been making these investments in generation, our investment portfolio has also been producing a positive return for taxpayers, with an annualised rate of return of 4.3% since inception. And each year, we are now receiving back, through refinancings and repayments, some $1 billion. Our second decade promises to be just as effective. As the financing agent of Rewiring the Nation, we are already well prepared for this enormous responsibility. Set to be the most comprehensive infrastructure program in the nation's history, it is a formidable task. But we're not new to financing the grid. We have invested more than $580 million into transmission-related projects. Project Energy Connect, our single largest investment to date, and a significant first step in AEMO's integrated system plan. This $295 million investment was in fact an innovative, long-dated, subordinated note structured with New South Wales TNSP Transgrid. We've also invested in the Southern Downs Renewable Energy Zone via Powerlink, which is a transmission augmentation linking many clean energy assets to the NEM with Queensland's incumbent TNSP, financing an additional 500 megawatts of new network hosting and unlocking the McIntyre wind farm, which when built will be over 1 gigawatt of capacity. Rewiring the nation is exactly the kind of challenge that the Australian Green Bank was designed for. Transmission operates in a complex world of regulation involving both private sector and government players. It depends upon the states. In Queensland and WA, of course, much of the energy infrastructure is owned by the state. In other states, it's been privatised. We are here to invest ahead of the market, prove up business models, accept and reduce risks, and crowd in much-needed private sector capital. Remember, this is a hugely capital-intensive task, and it cannot be done without private sector players. We estimate that some $120 billion of CapEx is needed to finance new solar, wind, transmission and storage to 2030 in order to meet this very ambitious goals around renewable energy and emissions. We need to install an estimated 29 gigawatts of large-scale renewables. That's about 3.6 gigawatts a year, 300 megawatts a month. That's a substantial wind farm a month. To give you, in order to reach 87% renewables and give you an understanding of the uplift required, last year, in terms of a large-scale wind and solar, we only installed 2.3 gigawatts, and it was something like 2.7 gigawatts of rooftops. So we are still well behind the pace. Recent budget initiatives will provide the CFC with $19 billion to help with rewiring the nation. It is only a fraction of the capital needed. We will be aiming to leverage our innovative capital alongside the private sector in order to deliver on this initiative. Whilst we are on the topic of capital, the budget last Tuesday night helpfully included an additional $1 billion allocated to the CEFC for the Household Energy Upgrades Fund. I know I'm slightly off topic here, but while we're talking about important things, this fund will provide discounted consumer finance to increase sustainability across the housing sector, including through investment in energy-efficient upgrades, high-performing appliances and battery-ready solar PV. Addressing the demand side of the equation is just as important as supply. The government's decision to entrust delivery of such initiatives to the CEFC is a welcome endorsement of our investment expertise and the work that we have done over the last decade. With the RTN, we're excited to work with the government's Rewiring the Nation office, newly established, the Australian Energy Regulator, the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, Andrew's here with us today, and of course AEMO to deliver in this once-in-a-generation transformation. We are already hard at work with many of the projects that have been touched on this afternoon. Of course, we will continue to invest in our core portfolio into clean energy generation and storage transactions. So we're still not deviating from our initial task. The Rewiring the Nation will all require substantial amounts of capital and investment expertise and a degree of patience as we navigate the headwinds of inflation, supply chain issues, social licence challenges of greenfields transmission, and of course increasingly higher interest rates. Everyone at the CFC is aware of these challenges and of course committed where we can to overcome them. By building a grid that taps into Australia's competitive advantages in sun and wind resources, our wide open spaces, we can ensure our economy and all Australians can thrive in a low emissions future. Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today hosting this incredible panel. And I don't need to tell everyone in this room what a critical topic this is: Australia's energy transition and the rewiring of our nation. So just before we jump in, let me start with a quick reminder. You can ask questions to our panel via the Pigeonhole app. I see some folk have already been active on there. We've already got at least 20 questions lined up and a lot of voting going on. So for those who are in the room, there are QR codes on the table, so please do jump in if you'd like to add to the questions that are coming in. For those online, you have a passcode and link on your screen. We could spend all afternoon talking about these questions, no doubt, panel, but I think we have slightly less than 20 minutes. I'm looking at Megan now, so we're going to have to keep our answers brief. Let's get straight into it. Ian, I might actually start with you because you were just talking through around that matching that you're getting in terms of the dollars you're putting in, the $2.47 matching to that. The budget clearly had energy transition and the Australian renewable energy superpower as a key thematic, and we're seeing the funds flowing into that. But certainly questions have been asked. The US hot to trot with the IRA and of course the EU with the Green Deal as well. Are we doing enough to attract the private investment that we need? Are you seeing that unlock?
Well, look, as you say, the Inflation Reduction Act is a big, shiny, appealing regulatory regime over there in the US, and it will certainly put some pressure, look, particularly on things like the emerging hydrogen sector, which we were very pleased also to hear in the budget of Hydrogen Head Start, which will allocate some $2 billion over 10 years to the hydrogen sector. And I think that's very important, and we're of course very active participants in the hydrogen sector. I mean, I guess what I would say is, kind of reinforcing the concept that there's only so much capital that the government can sort of drive into this sector, and that, the 19 billion that we have, we will use in a particular way to help make it easier for the private sector to come in. And some of these projects, we will be a slice of the capital structure, and that will allow senior debt and offshore equity in some cases, and domestic equity to come into big multi-billion-dollar transmission projects. In other cases, for example, Marinus Link, we might be the only initial financier, but that will be built, de-risked, and the private sector, once they see a large de-risked infrastructure asset, there's all sorts of people who would be interested in then coming in. So I think it's about being a catalyst, taking those risks that others aren't prepared to take, and using the finite, very substantial but finite capital that we have cleverly.
And of course, in the budget, last October's budget, we saw the funding for Rewiring the Nation, and we saw the Rewiring the Nation office stood up. I'm reading through one of the questions that's come through. It's got quite a number of votes. So it says, can you give an update on where the Rewiring the Nation is at? The budget papers note 12 billion has been allocated across Tasvic and New South Wales. When will those projects see money? What projects are next? Daniel or Minister?
The projects will see money when they're being built and when the CFC is satisfied that they're at the milestones that they've set out. So where's the Rewiring the Nation at? Rewiring the Nation office has been set up and it's going very well. When we announced Rewiring the Nation, I was in a bit of a conundrum about whether we get CFC to run it or AEMO to run it, because they both have great skill sets, but particular skill sets. So hence we decided to set up a Rewiring the Nation office within the department, which has the benefit of the input of both AEMO and CFC. AEMO about the benefit for the grid, about new projects, CFC for the financial benefit of the country and the soundness of the investment, and that's all going very well, working very closely under the stewardship of Joe Evans, who many of you would know, the Deputy Secretary of my department. So that's all going well. I outlined sort of progress on three of the items within each jurisdiction, because I picked those to give an indication that they're all coming along, all at varying points. They're all coming along. As I said, I'm in varying degrees of detailed negotiations with other jurisdictions. I'm pretty comfortable with where that's at, and we'll have more to say in the next couple of months. So basically we are getting on with it.
Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
I think AIM is a core part of the Rewiring the Nation office. I think things are progressing well. I mean, my mind at the moment, while that's going well, is very much in the space of community consultation. And I think, as I mentioned in my remarks, this is it's such an important part of building transmission, and that's where I'm focused quite a bit at the moment.
So both the Minister and yourselves picked up that critical piece around social licence building and community consultation. Can you give us some examples of where you've seen this done really well?
Yeah, perhaps it'll be a non-transmission example, the one that springs to mind, no reflection on transmission, but just in terms of, nevertheless, what could be a very controversial project. Of course, we're at the same time going very rapidly down the path of offshore wind. We are the world's largest island with no offshore wind, which strikes me as 7 different levels of crazy, but we're fixing it. I've designated the first zone, Gippsland, well down the consultation process for the second zone of Hunter, and some more announcements to come in coming weeks about the next steps. But in Gippsland, very beautiful part of Australia, very important environmental areas, much commercial and recreational fishing. It could be very problematic. There, the most advanced and the largest proponent, Star of the South, has done a first-class job of community engagement. There's a jobs guide you can pick up in Morwell or one of the towns in the Gippsland, which shows you all the jobs available at Star of the South and how you can apply for them. They've done put in enormous effort on community engagement. Elsewhere, I've seen offshore wind proponents, which, frankly, I think could lift their game. So again, I'm not here to lecture people and say you've all got to, you're all not doing it right. We're all on different parts of the journey, but I think we can all take that community consultation message and run with it. And if you're asking for, I think, the best example I've seen around the country of community engagement, which has seen broad community support and enabled me to declare the zone and it be very popular in the community, it would be the Star of the South project. It's taken them a long time. You know, they've been at it for several years. But it means when we're up and running, they'll be able to get through with strong community support.
Might also just add to that, if that's all right, that communities aren't homogenous either. So even on the projects where you hear that there are some issues, I mentioned Western Victoria, you know, there are landowners out there who coexist with both renewable energy on their farms and transmission, and they see the economic development, they see the opportunity that comes with it. And there are also parts of the community who are legitimately worried. And so it's not just one size fits all. I think I see Andrew Dyer sitting over there has been very helpful in framing up how we engage with communities as an industry. And I just think, you know, communities are not just one, there are lots of individuals, and we've just got to recognise their concerns and address them one by one.
And there's no doubt with the opportunities in front of us, given both the scale of the investment but also the lead time we have on these investments, that in the past where we've had participative outcomes, we can actually look to some more innovative and progressive ownership outcomes as well, which are really exciting for our communities and particularly our First Nations people as well. So we've got the Community Stakeholder Social Licence Challenge. Minister, you mentioned our supply chain constraints as well, which we're all very aware of, concentration risk and others. But another one that's come through the questions, of course, is our shortage of skilled resources. So I'll just read the question out. The shortage of skilled resources is likely to impact the energy transition, particularly in key engineering skills. What can the government do to support industry in addressing this risk?
Well, we've got to work together on, as I said before, it's in many senses a good problem to have, but that doesn't mean it's a small problem. It's just an excellent problem to have to fill so many jobs and fill so many highly skilled jobs. And I don't just think about it in terms of this particular project. I actually think it's probably even at a pointier end with the other project we've given CFC $1 billion for last week, energy efficiency. That is a highly skilled and quite unique subset of skills to go into an existing building and work out how to make it more energy efficient. And we don't have those skills anywhere near as much in Australia at the moment. But it comes down to training. It was a very core element of our Jobs and Skills Summit last year. There's a big uplift in training money in the budget, and a lot of it will be clean energy jobs. We've got our new energy apprentices, 10,000 new energy apprentices we're creating. And you know, if there are suggestions from corporates as to what more we can do, doors are open and very happy to discuss. But we are doing a lot. Of course, where our training system or our domestic market isn't keeping up, then of course the immigration system comes into play and it will work appropriately. But domestic training and retraining has to be the first focus, or we'll lose social licence more broadly, and it's not the right thing to do. So it's a two-stage process, training the workforce as intensely and quickly and appropriately as possible, then making sure that the immigration system can kick in if there are short-term shortages on key skills.
So building on that one, around skill shortages, but also the opportunity for us as a country to fundamentally reshape our workforce as well, and with that advanced manufacturing and sovereign capability. There's a question that's come in around what is government thinking in relation to Australian manufacturing sector to play a role in transition, especially when we know global supply chains are constrained.
Well, again, it's an absolutely... Somebody asked me what's the most important matter you're facing, and I don't think we have that luxury. These are all of a similar scale. And this is absolutely vital. You know, think of it this way. You can think of it a couple of ways, but think of it this way. We've put in the last 10 years 60 million solar panels on roofs in Australia, and 1% of them have been made in Australia. And the modern solar panel is an Australian invention. It was invented in Randwick. So that's inconceivable to me that we would keep going down that road. We have to put, to meet our 2030 targets, we have to put another 60 million solar panels on roofs in the next 7 years. So we have to do what we've done in the last 10 and do it again in the next 7. And it's inconceivable to me that we would continue down the road of 1% of them being made in Australia. To put it another way, look at it a different way. At the moment, 85% of the world's solar panels are made in one country, in China. You could take a similar metric and apply it to batteries, transformers, inverters. 85% today will be 97% in 3 years' time, because China has ramped up manufacturing on such a rapid pace. Now, that does expose us to real risks of a too overly concentrated supply chain. There's two answers to that: make more things here and get other countries to make more things, and both of them are part of the mix. We want to make more things here. We want trusted trading partners making more things, so we have diversified supply chains, and we want to make more things that we can supply to trusted trading partners as part of their diversified supply chains. Our National Reconstruction Fund comes in very importantly here, $15 billion of co-investment, with up to $3 billion set aside for renewable-related manufacturing, and an extra $1 billion set aside for critical minerals enhancement and processing. Other policies like our battery manufacturing precinct in Queensland come to the fore. As we all know, the economics of manufacturing and renewable economy are very different. It does make more sense to do more things here. As I said, it's just inconceivable to me that we'd miss the opportunity of not making much more of the supply chain, not all of it, of course. We have to be sensible, but much more of it here in Australia, and increasingly in our regions, the same regions undergoing economic change. This again be a key focus for our Net Zero Authority that I announced in Liddell Park a couple of weeks ago in the Hunter, because it'll be focused on identifying obstacles for investment in job creating manufacturing in our regions and knocking those obstacles down.
Daniel, another question's come in for government, but I might actually hand this one to you to give Minister Bowen a break. So this is a question around thinking regarding the aggregation of distributed energy resources, and especially as a model for powering regional cities. What is the thinking?
Well, I mean, this energy transition is not an either-or. It's not about large-scale renewables. It's not about just distributed energy resources. It's about both. We know that Australians have a terrific love affair with rooftop solar, and it is one of the things that is driving the energy transition, frankly, driving some of those low and negative prices that I spoke about earlier. But the key to unlocking those distributed energy resources is the ability to orchestrate them. So to make sure that they're contributing to an orchestrated system that works always in the best interests of all consumers. And that's one of the things that we're grappling with now. Is we know that rooftop solar and batteries and electric vehicles will be a core part of the future. But how do they play the best role they can, create the most value for all consumers, and not be a challenge? And that's something that I think we'll grapple with over the next few years.
And I might build on this one because a question has come in around EV infrastructure and charging as well. And I know we saw some of that in the budget as well in terms of the EV infrastructure funding coming through. As a recent owner of a Model Y Tesla, great car to drive, but my concern is there are only 4 superchargers in Sydney. Are there plans for more superchargers? Destination chargers have time constraints. And there's a number of votes for this question, people.
Well, as the driver of a base model Tesla 3, I agree. They're wonderful to drive. And yes, we've got a big piece of work to do on charging. And yes, there are more chargers coming. I would point to 2 government programs, both of which are well underway. There's our Driving the Nation One fast charger, once every 150 kilometres policy, which we are partnering with the NRMA to deliver, and the NRMA Chief Executive and I released all the locations a few weeks ago, and that will start rolling them out in coming weeks and months. And once that's up and running, I'm very confident of a relatively fast rollout over 2 years. Some of the sites are challenging because they're not on the grid. When you put a charger once every 150 k's, you're going to get into some fairly remote areas, but that's important because people need the peace of mind to know that if they drive, they can, they drive long distances on holidays or what have you, they can have access to a charger. We also have the ARENA funding in Sydney of 50 trial sites for on-street charging, so focusing on those communities where people tend not to have off-street parking. Vast majority of charging happens at home. 80% of charging happens at home, but if you don't have off-street parking, that is challenging stroke impossible. If you go to Europe, you'll see on-street charging everywhere. We have none basically in Australia in a suburban setting, so we need to move that around fast. So we are rolling out 50 sites across Sydney as a trial, pretty good trial, 50 sites, on telegraph poles and similar infrastructure in 9 different local governments in Sydney. And also in recent weeks we've announced $70 million of funding through ARENA for what we call innovative charging, so coming up with new models, new charging models, new designs, and putting government money in with private sector and local and state partners to roll that out across the country. So yes, we are a long way behind. I'm pleased, again, that since we came to office, EV sales have lifted from 2% to 7%. That's not bad for a year. 2 to 7 is obviously a big jump, but it's scratching on the surface of what we will need to do. And range anxiety is a key element holding back some of the demand. Of course, I would say though that the other big piece that we have announced we will do is the supply side challenge of introducing fuel efficiency standards, because Australia and Russia are the only 2 developed countries in the world without them. Hence, when I talk to chief executives of car manufacturers and say, why don't you send more EVs to Australia, because we have very long lead times and we don't have anywhere near enough affordable models. In the UK, there are like 60 affordable models. In Australia, there's 1. They say, because, Minister, you don't make us, and other countries do. So we need fuel efficiency standards to require manufacturers to send us EVs, more of them and more models, and we are doing that, and we will have good progress on that this year.
So building on the EV topic, Daniel, this one's probably for you. Is there any thought of a flexible time of export tariff to reflect the way that batteries and EVs can support the grid in a bi-directional DER landscape and make use of excess rooftop PV?
Absolutely, and look, it's more than just tariffs. It's about the technical standards that that allows electric vehicles to connect into the grid. Some of us who are interested in having a battery at home have an electric vehicle sitting in the driveway that's got 5 times the capacity, but can't soak the solar during the day and discharge it when you need it in the evening. Sometimes it's about time of use tariffs. More often than not, it's about the technical standards that the vehicle is manufactured to, or indeed the connection point into the home. So, I mean, the big point here is we've got to find a way of unlocking the value that is already contained in these distributed energy resources. Otherwise, we're going to build a grid and a power system that is more expensive for all consumers.
Talking about building that grid and the power system, Ian, this one's probably for you. What is the government thinking on much more open and broad private sector involvement in the build of transmission projects? How can we attract more investment in this space to accelerate transition?
Look, it's definitely something that the government and the CFC are very conscious of. I mean, if you look at a lot of transmission in the country, it goes into a regulated asset base in many cases. So there is an identifiable cash flow, and therefore there's already private sector capital that's been used there, particularly, of course, in the privatised TNSPs in New South Wales, Victoria, SA. So there's a lot of senior debt, there's international equity and domestic investors in that in those assets. Of course, in other states, transmission is state owned. However, I think they're looking at different models as well. So at the end of the day, transmission is an incredibly investable asset because it is long-dated, predictable cash flows for assets that are put into a regulated asset base. So, I think we're certainly very confident that we're going to attract a huge amount of accompanying or crowding in a huge amount of private sector capital alongside the CEFC into these projects. I'm confident of that.
Now, thank you, Ian. I'm conscious of time, but I would be very remiss if I did not ask the top voted question coming from Pigeonhole. So hang on to your seats, panel. Is nuclear power a realistic option to have in the energy mix? Has this option been discussed at the government level, given the policy and regulatory changes that would be necessary? Who would like to take that, gentlemen?
Shall I start, and then I'll hand it over. Look, there is no doubt that the cheapest form of new build energy today is firmed renewable energy, and that is the pathway of Australia's energy transition. Nuclear power is terrific for countries around the world who have it and who and are investing in it. So I mean, I lived for many years in the UK. Great nuclear industry. It's zero carbon. There's nothing against the technology at all. It's just, I mean, it's expensive for Australia, and I can't find a place where it would be located. But Minister, you have a perspective?
Yeah, I prefer the cheapest form of energy available over the most expensive. I mean, nuclear is by many multiples the most expensive form of new energy. Renewables is the cheapest. Why, as the country with the best renewable resources in the world, the best sun, above average wind, put them together, the best renewable resources in the world. We know what we need to do on the storage space. We know what we need to do on transmission. Even factoring in those costs, it's still cheaper. The idea of introducing the most expensive form of energy into our grid when we don't have an energy industry, and nuclear energy industry, we need to build the skills, the resources, the regulatory regime from scratch, makes no sense to me, to be very frank and very blunt. And there is no nuclear facility around the world under construction which isn't currently taking major delays and major cost blowouts. Major, from 5 billion to 9 billion. Even proponents of small modular reactors concede they cost 5 billion, which is a lot of billions for not many megawatts. And it makes no sense to me whatsoever, to be frank. And and again, that's before you even get to talk about social licence of transmission. Yeesh. You get the social licence of nuclear power plants. So it's not an option for Australia.
I'm sure we'd all love to continue this conversation, but I'm conscious we're at time. So please join me and put your hands together for our wonderful panel. So I'm now going to hand over to Ross Rolfe, CEO and Chairman of Iberdrola, for closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Vaya, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here today on really what the Minister reminded us, I think, is a historic occasion, or at least an opportunity for us to look at two huge historical opportunities going forward. The first is, of course, the opportunity to begin to correct much of the nation's history around its relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and I think that is a remarkable opportunity for all of us as a country going forward. The second, of course, is what we've been talking about today, which is how we revolutionise Australia's energy system, which, of course, is the lifeblood of our economy and society. So first, on behalf of everyone, can I thank the Minister, Daniel, Liz, Ian and Vaya for putting together such a thoughtful discussion for us all this afternoon, and for the opportunity to get some insights into critical issues that are going to lie ahead. It was also great to hear the importance that everyone is placing on what might be inadequately referred to as social licence. I think that really is the great challenge lying ahead. We do have most of the technologies to do the job. What we've got to make sure we do is we bring humans along the journey with us in a way that's fair and just, and deliver them a system which is affordable and reliable, and that's not an easy task. In closing, can I pay a particular tribute, I must say, to the federal government over the course of the last 12 months. For many of us, of course, we've lived through years of policy uncertainty and ambiguity, and it is truly remarkable to be in the place we now are, where we have a national government that's set a set of national targets and put together a thoughtful combination of programs in conjunction with the other states, which I think the industry can really deliver a great outcome from. So thank you, Minister, for the work that you've done there. It has been a wild ride, no doubt, for you for the last 12 months, but as an industry, we really appreciate it. And finally, thank you, CEDA, for your efforts to put together this event, enabling us all to advance towards the now commonly shared goal of net zero by 2050. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ross. Well, gee whiz, how do you wrap up that absolutely phenomenal session? To me, it was a bit of a story of kind of 5 C's, and I'd like to my reflections were that the first is that this task ahead of us is both complicated, but more importantly, it's complex. And we know that with wicked problems, we have to think differently, we have to be innovative, and we have to collaborate together to co-design solutions. I'm really keen and was really interested to hear of the government's role in this transition, and that is not one to take the task alone, but to do so in collaboration, because this is a complex problem. It's intergenerational, it's interchangeable with many other issues, and it's really important that the government doesn't try and do it alone, but acts as a catalyst for change. And we heard that that is exactly what this government is doing through its partnership with industry, its partnership across government divides, different levels of government, layers of government, and it's a really important part that the role of the government as catalyst, particularly around the de-risking of capital for this particularly complex problem. But the most important C's, I think, are around collaboration and community consultation. This is a wicked problem, and we will not do it, as we've heard from Ross so eloquently, without bringing the community along with us. And that is a collaboration that's at the initial stages, not something that's a fait accompli somewhere down the track where the community feels informed but not truly part of the solution. And that's a really important part of the very complex debate. And the final C is, of course, conversation. It's conversations like this that bring those different layers of government, the different parts of industry, the private sector, the public sector, and the community together to start thinking about how we play our role to rewire the nation. As the Minister said, you couldn't take the there's no transmission without transition without transmission quote as your own, but certainly this is not a whole of government solution, this is a whole of society solution that we need here, and I think that that's a really wonderful takeaway for today. So CEDA thanks you very, very much for being part of this conversation. It's an important one that we'll continue to take forward, and I wish you all the very best for your day. I'd like to just finally thank our sponsors, PwC, APA and Iberdrola, once again, without whom we could not put these events on. Please stay in touch with upcoming events through the CEDA website. I hope to see you all in Canberra next month for State of the Nation. There's no more beautiful time to be in Canberra than chilly winter in June for a wonderful conversation around the policy issues that once again affect the nation. Thank you very much and have a great day.